All right, we're gonna have some fun today. This is the Mir-1 37mm f2.8, and yes, you heard me right, that is a 37mm lens. I know it's a very strange focal length, but this is an old Soviet lens from the 50s. I'd say it's about probably just under 70 years old. And in today's video, we're gonna shoot some sample footage with this lens. We're gonna take a look at the sample footage, and then I'm gonna give you my analysis of the sample footage, and we'll go over what makes this lens really unique and different from other vintage lenses, if there's anything at all that makes it different and unique from other vintage lenses. So we're gonna test this out, and yeah, let's get into it. The first thing you'll notice on this lens is the Grand Prix Brussels 1958 etched on the front of the lens barrel. This is in celebration of the Mir-1 receiving the prestigious Grand Prix Award during the Brussels World Fair for Outstanding Lens Design. Now that's pretty cool, right? All right, before we start shooting the sample footage, let me go over my video rig setup here. We have the Mir-1 attached to the Canon EOS R5. We're gonna be shooting in 4K IPB, and we're using a K&F Concept M42 to EOS R adapter. All these products will be linked down below in the description if you wanna check them out. And on the front of the lens, and I swear by this filter, this is the Nisi True Color VND filter, and this thing is absolutely amazing. I refuse to shoot with anything else now that I've used this. It's got this True Color technology, so it takes that awkward color science of mirrorless cameras, because Canon was renowned for amazing color science, but their mirrorless cameras are just off. Sony cameras are off, the color science is just weird, but this Nisi True Color filter just kind of brings everything. It makes the whites white, like everything looks like white light. Nothing has an orange tint or a green tint or anything like that. It corrects for all of that. So I swear by this filter. I think it's absolutely amazing, and we're gonna be using that on the front of the lens for this video. All right, so I invite you to come with me. Let's head out and try and make some interesting compositions with this lens and shoot some sample footage and see what this lens can do. Let's go. All right, so we got a few things to talk about because that footage was pretty sweet, right? Like for a 70-year-old lens, it was super sharp, had a lot of vintage character. It was just beautiful. So let's unpack that. There's 5 things I want to talk about. 1 is image quality. 2 is those beautiful lens flares. 3 is the stepless aperture. 4, I found a little negative with the mount, and that's not really the lens's fault, but we'll talk about that. And then I'll give you my overall impressions. But before we get into that, I just want to let you know that we are now filming on the Mir-1 37mm f2.8. This is 4K from the R5, right out of camera, no color grading, no nothing. This is right out of camera into Premiere Pro and onto YouTube. So this is what the lens looks like with no editing, no filters, no nothing. So with that being said, let's get into it. All right, so image quality. That image quality was really good. Those images were sharp, they were crispy, there's a lot of detail. This lens obviously resolves a lot of detail, which is awesome, and it shows in the footage. And I was super impressed with how sharp and clean it was in the middle. Now, a lot of these old vintage lenses from the 50s and 60s, they're sharp in the middle, and then they get blurry as you move to the outside of the frame. But with this lens, I found that that center area that was sharp was a lot bigger than on some of the older or other vintage lenses of this era that I shot with. So I was pleased to see that. There's a big area in the middle that's really sharp, and then you get that nice blur around the edges, which makes it look obviously like a vintage lens, and that's why you shoot with vintage lenses, because you want the character. And speaking of character, let's move on to number 2, those flares. All right, so going back to that shot of the people walking on the sidewalk and the sun coming down, you're getting a lot of flare, and you can see those big balls of flare in your shot, and that is absolutely amazing. I love that. I mean, a lot of people will look at that as a negative, especially if you're like judging it as a modern lens, but as a vintage lens, this is exactly what you want. You want flares. So anytime you're shooting with a light source shooting into the lens, you're gonna lose a lot of contrast, and you're gonna get these beautiful flares everywhere. So that's just a trick when shooting with vintage lenses, if that's what you wanna do. But the thing that I really find impressive here, and I'm gonna touch on this again at the end, is that you get that sharpness and you get that good image quality, but you're also still getting this beautiful vintage character in the flares and the blurriness and all that kind of stuff. So that is pretty awesome. All right, so let's talk about the stepless aperture, but before we get into that, I set up some LED lights behind me. We have a window here behind me, and what you'll see is a glow around the light, and that's called halation. Now with modern lenses, you can use like black pro mist filters, bloom filters, and that kind of thing to create the halation. But with a lot of these old vintage lenses, because the lens coatings aren't as good as they are now, you're gonna get natural halation in the lens. So that's what you're seeing there. And I just wanted to test that out to see what it looks like. And it's a very mild halation. There's some lenses from the 80s that have way more halation than this. So halation is controlled pretty good on this lens, but you still have some. So that's awesome. Now what I wanted to talk about was the stepless aperture. Now, for video shooters, this is a huge bonus. For photographers, I mean, maybe it's good, maybe it's not, but for video people, it definitely is a huge plus, because what you can do is you can set your aperture to the max aperture you want, and then you have a little ring that you can turn in. It's completely click-free, and you can go from 2.8 to f22 without any issue. Like right now, we're shooting at f8, and if I want to turn the ring, I can turn it down to f2.8 and then back up to f8. No problems, no issues, so that's pretty cool. All right, so now let's talk about the mount, and I ran into a bit of an issue here. It's an M42 mount, so the lens screws into the mount. The issue is that the lens focus ring is really stiff. So when I went to defocus the lens, I was actually unscrewing it from the mount because I was trying to turn the focus ring. And of course, if you're not paying attention, you unscrew it, the lens falls on the ground, you break it, and then you get a lot of vintage character. So that's just something to keep in mind if you buy this lens and a mount. Make sure you don't accidentally unscrew it from the mount when you're trying to defocus. Now, with that being said, I'm pretty sure there's a way to open up this lens and re-grease that ring, so when you focus it, it doesn't unscrew, but that's a story for another video. I'm gonna look into that, and when I make the full review for this lens, I'll talk about that and let you guys know what I do. All right, so after reviewing that sample footage, what do I think about this lens? If I could sum it up in one word, I would say awesome. This is an awesome lens. You're getting you're getting like modern day sharpness, you're getting a lot of resolving power, it picks up a lot of details, it's crispy, but it still has that vintage charm. So you're still looking at lens flares, you're still looking at halation, you're still looking at fuzzy edges or blurry edges, and that's amazing. There's so many imperfections in the glass which give it character, plus you're getting the sharpness down the middle. I think if you're looking for a vintage lens with a lot of character and sharpness, this is definitely one you should consider. I'll put the price here. This is what it costs on eBay right now in USD at the time of making this video. And I think in terms of value for money, this is a great deal. You're getting a lot of character, a lot of quality at a price that's pretty fair, if you ask me, for a vintage lens that's 70 years old that creates this kind of images or this kind of footage. So yeah, in my opinion, I think this is a fantastic lens. I'm gonna do a full review of this lens, including like tests and charts and sharpness tests and all that kind of stuff. I'll do a technical review of this lens in the future. So if you want to see that, definitely subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot more vintage lens content coming up. And if you want to see the vintage lens content I already have, check the links in the description. There's a lot more vintage gear stuff there. So with that being said, thanks for watching. Peace out. I will see you guys in the next video.